Hey, Stephanie. Hey, Stephanie, can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can, Chair.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Eric Blank, and this is the Commissioners' Weekly Meeting for September 6th, 2023. Commissioner Plant, any preliminary matters? Are you ready to approve the consent agenda as presented?
I am ready to approve the consent agenda.
Commissioner Gilman,
Good morning. I would also vote to approve the consent agenda.
thanks to both of you. Proceeding number 23. Oh, I also vote to approve the consent agenda. Rocky start. Proceeding number 23A-0441 BP-ETA Hospitality Shuttle Emergency Temporary Authority application. Ms. Condra.
Good morning, Commissioners. Vanessa Condra with the Transportation section. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
This proceeding involves an application filed by Hospitality Shuttle LLC for emergency temporary authority for the maximum of 30 days to operate as a contract carrier and provide transportation for the Embassy Suite Hotel to and from DIA. Pursuant to statute 40-10.1204, the Commission may grant emergency temporary authority without providing notice of the application when there appears to be an immediate and urgent need for the service. The customer support letter from the hotel states that its current provider will be taking a leave of absence due to medical issues of the owner-operator. The applicant also operates or just received a luxury limousine permit, but understands that DIA will require this permit. So unless you have any questions, I'm prepared to make a recommendation.
If you can make your recommendation, that'd be great.
Staff recommends granting the emergency temporary authority.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree with the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
Thanks, Ms. Condra. I also agree with the recommendation.
as do I, and that can be an ABC order granting the application for emergency temporary authority. So thank you, Ms. Condra. Proceeding number 22I-0471 are Dr. Fishaber, Sable Boulevard accident and RTD corrective action plan.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is Pam Fishaber with the Rail and Transit Safety section. Something is going on with our internet in the office today, so I'm going to leave my camera off in attempt to not freeze.
Sounds good.
On July 27th, 2023, RTD filed a notice of corrective actions completed and exhibits to provide evidence that the required corrective actions for CAPs 1 and 2, 09212022, and then the educational corrective action requirements for CAP 3 of 09212022 have been completed. RTD requests closure of these corrective actions. I have added specific information about each of the corrective actions in the draft order, but since we've been through this a few times during the Commission's meetings, I won't go through that specifically this morning.
Sounds good.
For CAP 1 09212022, RTD filed documentation for the corrective action in this plan to show that the actions have been completed. Staff did field verify that the required changes to the radar sign location, additional signage, and required stop of the LRV before entering the Sable Expo crossing/curve. The reduction of speed limits were completed prior to startup of revenue service after the derailment. The final corrective action required RTD to develop a formal plan for implementation of the automatic train stop to be installed on the north side of the curve for track A, which is the track off the side which both derailments occurred. This plan shows that to install the ATS will take approximately 1 year and is estimated to cost $876,000. While development of the plan did occur, there are 2 questions that the Commission should seek answers for to follow up on this ATS installation. These include one, has funding for the ATS installation been budgeted and or appropriated? And if not, why not? And the second is, when would ordering of the necessary equipment for the ATS installation occur? I think I am completely frozen.
We can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
For CAP 2 09212022, RTD provided documentation to show that the 7 interim and final corrective actions were completed as ordered by the required dates. One attachment was a study by North Highland that made recommendations to hire additional field supervisors and lead field supervisors to meet the needs identified through RTD's analysis of its data. While everything required in the corrective actions was complete, there are a couple of questions that the Commission should seek answers for to follow up on the Highlands study recommendations. These include: 1, will RTD be moving forward with hiring recommendations as included in the North Highland report? If not, why not? And second, has RTD budgeted and or appropriated funding to hire the additional recommended field and lead field supervisors? And if not, why not? The last this morning is CAP 30212022. RTD did provide documentation to show that the educational campaign on rule infraction for obstructing and tampering with onboard cameras has been conducted. Specific information showing all signatures, acknowledging receipt, and reading of the bulletin was not included as part of the documentation because of personally identified information. So staff suggests that you require staff to verify the operator signatures for the corrective action as part of the in-cab and forward-facing camera audit checklist. The remaining items in CAP 3 are ongoing and have later target dates in the future. If there are any questions, I'm ready to respond. Otherwise, I can provide a recommendation.
If you could go to your recommendation, that'd be great.
Staff recommends that the Commission close the entirety of CAP 1 and CAP 2 09212022 and close the educational campaigns corrective action in CAP 3 09212022 and ask the questions as recommended by staff during the presentation.
Commissioner Plant.
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman.
Thanks, Dr. Fishaber. Appreciate the update, and I agree with your recommendation.
As do I. And if that can be an ABC order, Dr. Fishaber, consistent with your recommendation. So thank you. Proceeding number 21A-0141E, the Public Service Company of Colorado Electric Resource Plan and Clean Energy Plan. Mr. Davis, Ms. McLaughlin.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Ron Davis of the Commission's advisory staff, and I'm joined by Commission Counsel Aaron McLaughlin this morning. The first energy matter on today's weekly meeting agenda comes in phase 2 of Public Service Company of Colorado's Electric Resource Plan. This particular ERP includes a clean energy plan. Yesterday, Public Service filed a joint motion for a partial waiver of certain ERP rules for modifications to the phase 2 process and its schedule, along with a request for a waiver of response time. The joint motion includes Public Service's third request for additional time to file its 120-day report on bid evaluation and selection, this time moving the filing date 1 week from September 11th to September 18th. Because other filing deadlines and milestones are pegged off the filing date for the 120-day report, the joint motion includes requests to modify the procedural schedule for the balance of phase 2. The joint movements, include Public Service, staff of the Commission, and the independent evaluator for this particular ERP. Public Service states that it attempted to confer with the parties in this proceeding and reports that the joint motion is opposed by the Colorado Independent Energy Association, or CIEA, the Colorado Solar and Storage Association, or COSA, the Solar Energy Industries Association, or SEIA, and the Interwest Energy Alliance. Nevertheless, Public Service requests that the Commission waive the response time to the motion because time is of the essence. Specifically, the joint movements propose that in addition to moving the deadline for the 120-day report from September 11th to September 18th, the Commission moved the deadline for the filing of the IE's report from October 11th to October 26th, and then to move the deadline for the filing of intervener comments from October 26th to November 17th. The company's responsive comments would be filed on December 4th instead of November 10th, and the written Phase 2 decision is requested by January 11th instead of December 11th. Public Service states that the 7-day extension for the filing of the 120-day report will provide the independent evaluator and the company additional time to vet the series of portfolios to be presented in the 120-day report. The company points to the challenge of managing the significant number of submitted bids and the wide array of technologies presented for evaluation. The motion states that the IE believes it would be better to have robust review and testing, and that additional time should be provided for the company working with the IE to prepare and present those final portfolios in the 120-day report. The motion further states that the bid evaluation and selection process has been far more complex than prior Phase 2 processes. The joint motion states that the proposed schedule changes accomplish 2 objectives. First, the schedule provides the IE with a total of 15 days of additional time. That is 7 days prior to the filing of the report and 8 additional days for the IE to prepare its report after the filing of the 120-day report. And second, the schedule provides the interveners with 15 additional days to comment on the 120-day report. The joint movements also propose some actions that they suggest will help mitigate the effects of the requested delay. For example, Public Service intends to notify bidders in its preferred plan and potentially the backup bidders for that plan on a confidential basis of their selection into the preferred plan on September 11th, the current date for the filing of the 120-day report. They suggest that this approach will allow the selected bidders to begin to take steps to move forward and develop the projects. Public Service also states that it will begin initiating negotiation of each bid prior to an anticipation of a supportive final Phase 2 decision. They also suggest that the Commission conduct its oral deliberations on Phase 2 before the close of this year, where the written decision would follow in early January. Yesterday, CIEA, Interwest, and COSACIA filed a response in opposition to the joint motion. The independent power producers argue that this third extension request is not for Public Service to complete its modeling analysis or the 120-day report, but rather the requested extension is primarily for the benefit of the IE and staff, as well as a significant extension for Public Service's own reply comments. They claim that the proposed extension is not incremental because of the contemplated delay in the Commission issuing its final written Phase 2 decision. They ask that the Commission determine that the joint motion is prejudicial to the IPP bidders and consequently prejudicial to ratepayers, including the risk of higher bid costs and project viability in a matter that outweighs the purported benefits of an extension of the ERP schedule. The IPPs thus request that the Commission retain the September 11 filing date for the 120-day report and also retain the Phase 2 written decision date in the ERP rules that corresponds to that September 11th filing. They claim that the company's proposal to notify certain bidders of their status in the preferred portfolio is unworkable when parties are not informed of the same information at the same time. The IPPs also put forward an alternative schedule for the Phase 2 if the commissioners are interested. The alternative schedule seems to be premised on the notion that it's better for the 120-day report to be filed on September 11th, despite the IE's present concerns. They state, quote, while the IE's analysis is a useful check on Public Service's modeling, the IE report can propose changes to portfolios if the IE determines that to be the proper result without needing a week in the shadows, unquote. Hence, the IPPs ask that the IE-driven changes to portfolios come later in this Phase 2 process, likely in the company's response to the comments. Their proposed schedule thus retains the September 11 filing date and concludes with a Phase 2 decision still issued on December 15th. Regarding the requested 7-day delay in the filing of the 120-day report, the IPPs claim that public service presents no justification why parties should wait an additional week while the IE has time to review the same report. The IPPs state that public service has not offered the bidders the opportunity to extend the in-service dates of their projects 105 days into 2026, nor allowed 2026 or 2027 in-service date projects to be extended at all. They add that considering the need for time for the commission to address RRR to the phase 2 decisions, projects are further postponed from going to the financial markets and for procurement until roughly a year after those bids were submitted in March of this year. The IPPs also assert that bidders may not begin to take steps to move forward by being included in the 120 date, notwithstanding what public service states in the joint motion. This is because bid projects cannot receive financing or execute construction contracts prior to be included in a commission approved ERP. And it's more likely that financing and construction contracts won't come until after an offtake agreement is fully negotiated with public service. They point out that the company's preferred portfolio is not the commission approved portfolio, and as such, the preferred portfolio has no more endorsement of moving forward than any other portfolios until they are all analyzed. The IPPs add that granting the joint motion would result in likely more than a 1-month extension of this phase 2 process, causing significant exacerbated risks for the IPP projects. They argue the risk of increased costs, project construction delays, and resource adequacy reliability in 2026 and 2027 outweigh the proposed modifications to the phase 2 schedule at this point. They therefore ask the commission to afford IPP projects with in-service dates in 2026 to be afforded extensions of 74 days, including into 2027 and 2028, commensurate with prior extensions previously granted by the commission in consideration of public services continued delays. So that's the joint motion for modified phase 2, including a delay of 1 week for the filing of the 120-day report and the IPP's initial response in opposition to the joint motion. I can answer questions, or you could proceed to your discussion. I'm also prepared to make a recommendation if you'd like.
Yeah, if you can make a recommendation, Mr. Davis, and then we'll come back with questions, comments, concerns, or a vote.
Okay. In light of the approaching September 11th deadline for the 120-day report, we suggest that the commission grant the 7-day extension and permit the report to be filed on September 18th. We think the joint motion shows good cause for the commission to grant the additional time. The bid evaluation and selection process in phase 2 is to ensure that bidders get a fair and reasonable chance to contract with the company, but the phase 2 process has never served to prohibit public service from communicating with developers on projects it wants to pursue. Projects need to win the bidding process, period. Otherwise, cost recovery is in jeopardy. The expedited phase 2 process requires that the 120-day report be an exceptionally complete and useful document to the commissioners. While the IE is there to monitor bid evaluation and selection, there's also an interest in the IE working out potential problems and concerns with the company before it's too late in the phase 2 process. The IE is in the phase 2 process to expedite bid evaluation selection for the benefit of all bidders and to the benefit of ratepayers. And contrary to the characterizations made by the IPPs in its response, there are indeed a lot of bids and a lot of technologies in play here and many, many factors to consider in this particular ERP. Another 7 days for the IE to get more comfortable with what public service is going to present to the commission makes a lot of sense to the advisors. Nevertheless, because the joint motion is opposed and includes proposed deadlines after September 18th, we suggest that the commission set response time to the other requests for release set forth in the joint motion. We recommend that those responses be filed no later than this Friday, September 8th. And the commission can then address the balance of the phase 2 schedule, including the subsequent deadlines that flow from the 120-day report that are not set forth in the commission rules, such as the deadline for the phase 2 emission verification report from CDPHE and the deadline for the company to initiate the performance incentive mechanism stakeholder process at a future weekly meeting. So again, the recommendation is to grant the 7-day extension for the filing of the 120-day report and to set response time of September 8th for the remaining requests for relief in the joint motion.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Besides potentially suggesting that we rename the 120-day report to something different, Commissioner Plant, thoughts on the recommendation, questions, concerns, or anywhere you'd like to take it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to support the recommendation, but I would like to hear from you, Mr. Chairman, since you've lived on both sides of this issue and understand it much better than I do. I did have one question about about month movement of our decision from December into January of next year. Does that have any implications for timeframes or any kind of deadlines that we might be looking at in the case?
I assume that question's for me.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think the major thing is the written phase 2 decision sets the final bid evaluation and selection from the commission's perspective, and there has been RRR to most phase 2 decisions and past ERPs. And so I think there is a legitimate concern about it taking a year, basically from the time the bids were submitted to getting certainty on the bids that would move forward to the offtake agreements as the IPPs describe them. There are some other things that are pegged off of the phase 2 report, such as when bid information becomes final and public, that kind of thing. But really, the important thing in a phase 2 is to make sure the bids stay viable as submitted at the time of the solicitation, so that there is certainty on what the costs and benefits are to Colorado and public services ratepayers.
Anything else, Commissioner Plant?
No, I appreciate that clarification. Thanks.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes without saying this is not ideal. Looking at a third extension here, I agree with your recommendation, Mr. Davis. I just worry. I mean, I guess we'll see responses by Friday. If the indication so far from the company now in its third delay is that this is, kind of far more complicated than in previous ERPs and has caused them extra time. I wonder what the implications then are for, first of all, parties to kind of react, as well as for the commission to analyze and react. So, I think the indications here are, if this really is as complicated and novel as the company is putting forth, I think we'll have to see how all of these timelines play out, which is obviously concerning in terms of keeping those bids viable and keeping things moving as quickly as possible. So I don't know what to make of all of this. I just probably stand by my original comment. Totally not ideal. We want to keep this moving, but at the same time, now the company's looking at upwards of 80 days of delays. And I think we have to consider other parties, including us, might need more time than usual as well. So yeah, I agree with your recommendation. Let's hear from everybody else by Friday regarding kind of what happens after that. But I think we have to acknowledge too, like, they're kind of in the dark at this point. The parties don't know what they're going to see in this report. So like, they're trying to comment on how much time they need, but I don't think they know what specific or new issues they're going to be seeing in this report. So yeah, I'd like to keep it moving as quickly as possible, but all indications are this is going to be time consuming even still.
I agree. Well, not ideal is right. I mean, geez, I get it's a challenging environment right now with rising interest rates, tariff changes, and supply chain challenges, and there's considerable urgency. And although it's premature right now, I'd probably be sympathetic to providing more time to the winning bidders to get their projects online later in the process. But as you both said, for now, I think we'd better give the company the additional week to help get this right, as the IE and trial staff request. But it seems appropriate to solicit more guidance on the other deadlines beyond this week. So I also support the recommendation. With that, does that give you what you need, Mr. Davis? I think this can be an ABC order.
Yes, thank you very much, commissioners.
Thank you, sir. Proceeding number 22AL-0530E, Ms. Friedman, Ms. Harper, Public Service Company of Colorado Electric rate case. Trying to finalize our order before before tomorrow. Ms. Friedman, can you help us tee up the 2 or 3 areas where there may be some open issues?
Sure. Good morning, commissioners. I'm Ellie Friedman of your advisory staff, and with me is Commission Counsel Ruthie Harper. At the August 16th Commissioners' Weekly meeting, the Commission voted to approve the settlement agreement proposed in this case, resolving most of the issues in Public Services Phase 1 rate case and 2022 transmission cost adjustment filing. You agreed to circulate the written order and reconvene for further deliberations if needed. So since then, a draft order has been circulated and several issues have come to light requiring more discussion today in order to arrive at final language for the written order. So I'll address each one of these and then pause so you can discuss and vote for the final language. So the first issue concerns the cost of capital. At your prior deliberation, you voted to approve the terms in the settlement that provide for a return on equity of 9.3% and a weighted average cost of capital of 6.95%. As you may recall in that discussion, Boulder, the party opposing the settlement, had recommended an ROE of 8.51% and a WACC of 6.51%. Alternatively, Boulder suggested a WACC of no more than 6.82% and an ROE of no more than 9.3%, as was approved in the company's last electric rate case. Boulder suggested this could be accomplished by either lowering the equity ratio to 53.2% or reducing the ROE to 9.06% and maintaining the 55.69% equity ratio. So for discussion today is what language you would like reflected in the written order to address approval of the settled terms.
Maybe I'll start out. For me, as I said in our deliberations, I had significant concerns with the settlement agreement common equity ratio of 55.69%. Among other concerns, I believe that the parties largely ignored our guidance in the prior Public Service Company gas rate case decided just 9 months ago for the same company with much of the same evidence, where we set the common equity ratio between 52 and 55%. If we hadn't been able to agree on TCA reform, I was prepared to find that this element of the settlement agreement was not in the public interest and adopt the 52 to 55% common equity ratio as in the last Public Service Company gas rate case. Even now, I'm still struggling with a common equity ratio this high. Given all this, I would like to see language in our final order expressing significant concern with the common equity ratio established in the settlement agreement. I'd also like to explicitly reference our decision in the prior gas rate case, as well as its findings setting a common equity ratio of 52 to 55%. Commissioner Plan, I seem to remember in our deliberation that you might have gone further and maybe even overturned this aspect of the settlement agreement, even with the TCA reform. But for now, would you where are you on this stronger language in the current decision? And please feel free to take this wherever you'd like to go. Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I do agree with you with respect to the equity ratio, and But I also understand, balancing that with a desire to not completely blow apart the settlement agreement. So I think what your language was attempting to achieve is just sort of a message for future filings. I guess it would be what you were after, and I support that.
And I guess Commissioner Gilman, I may have truncated this discussion a little early at our prior deliberation. It seemed like you maybe would not support this language, but any comments, thoughts about what you'd like to see?
Yeah, I mean, I think here what we're struggling with is between what outcome might we have come to on our own absent a settlement agreement versus where the settlement agreement got to. And as you said, I'm really in the same boat. I think that the TCA reforms that were decided upon played a pretty key factor to me in essentially determining the overall reasonableness and fairness of the total outcomes here. So I would say, absent the TCA reforms, I would have significant concerns. Right now, look, I would appreciate if there was some more consistency in the equity ratios, but I wouldn't characterize my concerns as significant. Otherwise, I would not have voted to approve the settlement agreement. I think when taken in combination with the TCA reforms, it presents a reasonable package that I don't have what I would describe as significant concerns at this point in time with the totality of the package. With respect, I would prefer that we reference essentially a preference in the future for equity ratio ranges and kind of the lack of false precision of going so detailed on those. But I would err on the side of refraining from referencing the gas rate case specifically. I think it was a totally different case with totally different circumstances for a different operating company. And I think it's reasonable that those be litigated separately as they have been. And so I would support more general language rather than that super specific language. I don't take anything to mean that the company should just simply copy and paste the outcomes in a gas rate case into an electric rate case here. And so wouldn't support language that indicates that we think that's what they should do now or in the future.
I don't think, I just feel more strongly than you do and would like to send a stronger message going forward. And, that prior decision would have been the basis for me to potentially, set a different common equity ratio. So I think I'd like to retain that language, and sounds like I likely have a second vote to do that. So unless Commissioner Plant changes his mind, I think I'd like to retain that language. So I don't know, Commissioner Gilman, Commissioner Plant, has Commissioner Gilman changed your mind, or where are you at?
No, I think that the strong language is, I think, justified. I don't, maybe you could talk a little bit more. Our different cases are not, it's not a stare decisis sort of thing. Like, we don't set something in the gas case that has to be followed. And I wonder if our language can be more, in this, we could just talk about the reason why we want this range, and why the equity ratio is important, to us to set that range, as opposed to simply just referencing the gas case. I don't know if you have any kind of language that you might propose for that. I do support, I think we gave them pretty clear instructions that that was what we wanted, and that's not what we got. And that is disturbing to me. So I'm wondering if you have any ideas of language that we might be able to come to that just basically outline the reasons why we want to have this and that we expect to get that in the future, in future filing.
I am scrambling to pull up the language and see if I have a proposal. Given that the company has the legal authority to put in rates, the rates it proposed in last November, if we don't get a written decision tomorrow, I think we better decide this today.
I mean, to help you out, I will say probably the biggest opposition I have is the reference to the latest gas rate case. To me, these are different cases for different operating companies. And I think increasingly the situation, the outlook, the risk of gas utilities versus electric utilities may diverge. And I don't see making an equivalency here that may not exist. And I don't think we've made a finding exists in terms of the financial situation or outlook. And so to me, that's my biggest issue. If we want to add some general language about the preference for a range and the preference for getting to a determined WACC in the most cost-effective way possible for customers, those are fundamentals that I agree with. It's just an equivalency to a different operating company that increasingly is under different circumstances going forward. I just don't necessarily agree with or think we have the evidence here to support.
I appreciate that. So how about this? Can we leave the word significant in there? We'll take the reference to the natural gas rate case out of the body of the text. And why don't we, all right. And I'd be fine with that. And we do have a reference to the gas rate case in a footnote already. So would that work for you, Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I would support a general reference to a range and a lack of false precision and to achieving a certain WACC in the most cost-effective way, given the ROE and equity ratios as the two variables. I'm totally on board with those, but I don't want to send the message that I at all expect one operating company's outcomes of a rate case to copy and paste to another. I just don't think it's justified.
I appreciate your desire to treat the natural gas business separate than the electric business. So I guess would that work for both of you to leave the word significant in there? We'll take out in the body of the paragraph language referring to the natural gas rate case, and we'll leave the footnote as is. I see you shaking your head. Yes, Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, that works for me.
Commissioner Gilman.
Yes.
Thanks to both of you. You want to try the next one, Ms. Friedman?
Sure. So the next concern is the Energy Insecurity Working Group. The settlement calls for public service to work with stakeholders in proceeding number 23M0013EG to develop a consensus estimate of the number of energy insecure customers and to discuss potential actions to reduce energy insecurity, including for customers near the household income thresholds for energy assistance programs, and also how to account for building, heating, and transportation electrification in the definition of energy insecurity. Within 6 months of the final decision in this proceeding, Public Service is to file a description summarizing the discussions, the data, proposed solutions, and areas of disagreement from the working group. Boulder requested that the Commission order that a party other than Public Service lead the working group and that the working group be required to quantify the cost of energy insecurity. Additionally, Boulder objected to Public Service's methodology for estimating the number of energy insecure customers. So for discussion today is what language you would like included in the order requiring outreach in this area. Specifically, what type of customer-specific information you would encourage or require Public Service to provide to assist in this effort?
Again, I'll start. So regarding the Energy Insecurity Working Group, I'd propose including explicit language in our order asking the company to make available to the working group under appropriate confidentiality propensity to pay, customer information involving arrearage, assistance requests, payment history, and other related data. The goal would be to have the working group explore various ways this arrearage data, potentially paired with income, education, location, age, and other broader customer-specific information, could help us target the customers we need the most, that need help the most. I believe the language I proposed in the order tracked my questions to Mr. Hay and my comments in the deliberation. But I guess from Council, Commissioner Gilman, I understand you had some concerns with that language. So I thought we'd better try and resolve it hopefully before tomorrow. So I guess I'll go start with you, Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, thanks. I think the main question here is I actually understood that we would indicate a preference to see the company use some of this information in that working group. I think that the language in the order came across stronger in terms of requiring. And so I have some question about, are we asking them or requiring them to do some of this? But also to consider the working group has a fairly significant chunk of work they've already agreed to as part of the settlement agreement and only a 6-month timeline. And I think here we've set out what we think is maybe helpful information, but we haven't actually heard, at least to my understanding in this record, from the actual experts working on energy equity and kind of income qualified assistance, what specific information they want or need to make this all go faster or smoother. So perhaps the most effective first step here would be to ask the working group to work on this problem, to determine what data is available from the company that avoids any data privacy information, which if we're asking them to give specific customer arrearage data or disconnection data may already be running afoul of certain confidentiality issues. But if we ask the working group to work with the company to determine what data is already available, avoids those data privacy issues, and is actionable, and they understand how they would use it and what they would do, that may well be the best use of time rather than essentially ordering the company to do a data dump of data that might have privacy problems and nobody's really asked for and doesn't exactly know what to do with right at this point in time. So that seems to me the most prudent next step, is to have the working group identify what should be provided and how could it be provided. I'm not necessarily sure that in 6 months they can do everything they've already signed up for and meaningfully analyze this data, even if we can get through the data privacy issues in that amount of time.
I guess I'd like to see something a little stronger. I'm happy to change the word order to request or ask, and I'm happy to put language in there to the extent reasonably practicable. But I'd like to provide fairly strong guidance, if possible, to go down this route. I'm just really struggling with targeting half the customer base for making it equity eligible without finding ways to better target customers. So if the working group needs more time, the company's not shy about asking for more time, but I'd like to provide stronger guardrails on this and have it move more quickly. So I'd be happy to change the order to request or ask, and I'd be happy to put to the extent reasonably practicable in there. But I'd still like to, and there's already language about appropriate confidentiality in there. So I don't know, Commissioner Plant, you want to weigh into this, and then back to you, Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with the stronger language. I think that, making sure that the data is anonymized, I think is important. What they're trying to do is identify, trends. They're trying to identify, ways that they can effectively target programs. And, you know, I think the more data, it may be, you know, as Commissioner Gilman pointed out, that they don't necessarily need some of this stuff, but having it and deciding that you don't need it is different than not being able to get what you need. So, and you know, not being able to get what you need just delays the ability to address the issue. And if they have more than they need, they can, you know, not use what they don't need to. But I think it's important to get this data to the working group so that they can actually do the kind of analysis that is going to lead to an effective program. And so I'm supportive of doing that and making sure that it's anonymized.
Commissioner Gilman, does the changing the order language to ask and request and putting to the extent reasonably practicable, you know, with appropriate confidentiality, does that get you there? Or
in total, that's probably more watered down than telling them they need to come up with what data is necessary as part of the working group. Just to be perfectly honest, I mean, another thing the company is not shy about is when we say if reasonably practicable, a lot of things turn out to be not reasonably practicable. Magically.
I'm not pushing for that language.
So what I worry is in total, that's actually a more watered down solution than what I offered, because there's some real easy relief valves there. You know, so potentially you can request it with the reasonably practicable language, but also add language that says if it was not provided as part of the working group, then an outcome of the working group should be determination of what data should be provided, at what interval, how it should be anonymized, and who it should be provided to in order to streamline, you know, benefits and programs and assistance to the most vulnerable customers. I think that would solve both issues if it can be provided more quickly and people know what to do with it. Great, let's get on it. But I worry there are way too many exits in that strategy that don't result in anything, essentially. So the backstop is if you don't provide anything or there's not clarity about what should be provided, then an outcome of the working group should be making those determinations about what data, how, and when should be provided to ensure that, especially the partners in the company, can come up with a way to ensure these programs are reaching the most vulnerable customers.
So let's take out the to the extent reasonably practicable, and we'll put in language as you suggest, saying if the working group decides this is not the best path forward or the most appropriate path forward for determining the most vulnerable, identifying and targeting the most vulnerable customers, then please let us know what you think is the best way, something like that.
Yeah, and
So,
I would be more specific. What data should be collected? How would it be appropriately treated or anonymized? And on what intervals should it be provided, just to ensure, you know, I mean, I'm all about more data, but you want to make sure the data is useful and people know what to do with it and they expect it to come. So I think that provides a necessary backstop of a path forward.
I think I'm okay with that language. Do you have what you need to get out an ABC order, Ms. Friedman?
I think that's sufficient, yes.
And Commissioner Plant, did you have any other guidance, tweaks, concerns, anything you'd like?
Well, I didn't know if we wanted to, I don't know if there was an issue with public service leading versus somebody else. I know that Boulder didn't make a recommendation on some other entity leading. I mean, I don't know that there's an issue with public service leading the group. And I I mean, I'd be open to others, but I don't want to pick somebody who maybe doesn't have the capacity to do that when we don't have any information to guide us that way. So.
Yeah, I think we made that determination. I mean, I think we already made that determination for that exact reason. We didn't know who else to put on there. So I think we denied the Boulder proposal. I see you nodding your head. Yes, Ms. Friedman.
Yes, you did.
Okay. So Commissioner Gilman, Commissioner Plant, anything else on this?
No, I agree. We made that determination. I think in hearing CEO express some, ability or willingness to help. So to the extent the company needs help, they may find a willing partner there.
I think that's all I had on this. I know there were a couple other questions, but I think I'm okay with this order with as an ABC order, consistent with this discussion. So Commissioner Gilman, given the time, are you okay with an ABC order?
Yes. Thanks, Ms.
Commissioner
Friedman.
Plant. Thanks, Ms. Friedman.
Thank you.
Let's see, where are we? Proceeding number 23A-0025E, Black Hills EV charging. Mr. Mendelson, Ms. Harper.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Mike Mendelson of your advisory staff. I'm joined by Ruthie Harper of Commission Counsel. Black Hills submitted its application in the instant proceeding 23A-0025E in January this year to implement a rate specifically designed for electric vehicle public charging stations. The parties to the proceeding include the company, staff, CEO, Electrify America, and ChargePoint. The application generally offered two rate options, a flat rate and a time of day or TOD rate. A settlement agreement was filed with the Commission on June 2nd by all parties except staff and centered on the TOD rate option. Supporting testimony was filed shortly after. The Commission held an evidentiary hearing on the agreement on June 21. SOPs were received on July 14th. As a bit of background, Senate Bill 19-077 suggests the Commission facilitate electric vehicle charging rates in order to, among other things, support widespread transportation electrification within utility territories, facilitate the deployment of customer-owned or utility-owned charging infrastructure, and encourage vehicle charging that supports the operation of the electric grid. In its 2021 decision on Black Hills Transportation Electrification Plan application, proceeding number 20A-0195E, the Commission directed the company to work with stakeholders and propose a rate that does not include a demand charge, and to look at innovative rate structures to overcome the economic disincentive that can challenge DCFC development, particularly at stations with lower utilization rates. The settlement agreement to the current proceeding specifies the following: that the Commission should approve the TOD rate alternative included in the company's application, that Black Hills will conduct a rate design study to present in either the company's next rate case or its 2026 TEP filing, that Black Hills will discuss rate design issues and options to encourage off-peak charging by EV drivers during regular stakeholder meetings, and that the Commission should authorize Black Hills to file the necessary tariffs via compliance letter on not less than 2 business days' notice. Aside from the broad approval or rejection of the settlement, there are 5 interrelated issues at play. The ability of the EV rate to induce private investment in EV charging infrastructure, the appropriate peak hourly period, the appropriate ratio of on-peak prices to off-peak prices, the potential for EV fleet managers to switch loads to the new rate proposed for public charging stations, and whether rate design should precede the transition to a renewable-centered portfolio without full insight with what that portfolio may look like. The settlement TOD tariff established a peak hourly period of 1 to 7 p.m. and a price ratio of 1.2 to 1. The settlement set the on-peak price at 26 cents per kilowatt hour and the off-peak price at 21.5 cents per kilowatt hour, approximately. Generally, staff disagrees with the proposed tariff and argues for a different on-peak period of either 3 to 9 p.m., referred to as option 1, or 2 to 10 p.m., referred to as option 2. For both options, staff suggests the Commission adopt a much larger price ratio of 3 to 1 in the summer and 2 to 1 the non-summer months of October to May. This would cause rates to be as high as 52 cents in summer and nearly 35 cents in non-summer months. The settling parties argue that the proposed tariff would induce investment in DC fast chargers by lowering risk to private developers. The settling parties contend that charging stations generally absorb high on-peak rates by offering a flat rate to drivers in order to simplify the charging experience, and that high on-peak to off-peak ratios increase risk related to charging station ownership and generally thwart investment. The settling parties contend that EV charging station owners have a geographic choice of where to invest their dollars in Colorado. Accordingly, they argue the principle of customer acceptability is critical in in the commission's decision. If there is no investment in public chargers, there will be no customers to take service under the rate, and thus the goal of rate stability will be moot. Selling parties also argue the electricity consumption via DC fast chargers is generally inelastic, and price signals will likely not shift load to off-peak hours. They contend the commission generally agreed with this principle in recommended decision number R220378 and proceeding 21 AAL 0494E involving EV rates for public service. Further, the selling parties argue DCFC site hosts have few options to manage load. They say site hosts cannot directly respond to price signals of the TOD rate without throttling DCFC power output, thereby slowing charging speeds or turning chargers off during on-peak times, both of which would diminish the EV driver experience and defeat the purpose of offering fast charging services. Staff's Mr. Haglund argues that the commission does not regulate the rates that EV charging companies will offer to their customers. He says EV charging companies will manage the driver-facing rate according to their own business interests. It is possible the commission could approve a TOU rate, and an EV charging company could absorb all the time variation and pass on a flat rate to its customers. Or conversely, it is possible the commission could approve a flat rate only to see an EV charging company add to its time variation that has nothing to do with the utilities costs. Staff contends there's no empirical evidence that demand for public charging is inelastic and that the company has conducted or submitted no such research. Staff points to articles indicating Tesla and EVgo have both begun offering time-varying rates for public high-speed charging. With respect to specifically to the peak hourly period, staff contends that Black Hills did not factor in any of the investments in solar generation it is likely to make in its current ERP proceeding, that the settlement rate is insufficiently forward-looking, and that the system peaks will likely increasingly occur outside of this window with greater frequency as solar continues to grow, referring specifically to the California duck curve as a potential outcome. Staff contends that the company's top 100 peak load hours net of renewables during 2022 occurred during the period 1 to 9 p.m., with 83% falling in the period 3 to 7, although Black Hills' proposed on-peak period of 1 to 7 would capture 94% of these highest net load hours. Staff argues the summer peak period hours in option 1 would only be in effect for 6% of the hours of the year, and on-peak hours only represent 18% of the hours of the year for both summer and non-summer periods. The settling parties contend that characterization as disingenuous when few customers are expected to charge at public charging stations during off-peak hours 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It's more likely that EV drivers will charge their vehicles during the afternoon or evening hours on their commute home, they say. They argue that staff's expectation of future solar growth is premature and speculative, as the upcoming ERP Phase 2 process may find wind to be more cost-effective than solar, and in any case, that such resources will not be placed into service for several years. Given that the EV rate will be readdressed in 3 years or sooner, selling parties contend the addition of substantial solar resources within this period is unlikely, and there's no reason at this time to adjust the 1 to 7 p.m. peak period to later hours. They say a new study is needed to determine if the hour of the system peak is shifted before any changes to the company system peak can be made. With respect to the on-peak to off-peak price ratio, the settlement parties explain their proposed rate embeds a price ratio of 1.2 based on the installed cost differentials of 2 existing units, one more relevant to base load operation and another used more for peak generation production. The company admitted that the price ratio does not include the difference in energy cost or transmission and distribution costs to meet peak loads. Staff argues the ratio should be consistent with existing TOU rates. Staff contends the EV rates need not be based on cost, but generally on policy considerations, and says the commission has generally not approved TOU rate price ratios based on specific calculations of underlying costs. Staff notes the company's last class cost of service study, it determined a price ratio for the large general service rate class of 5.74 to 1 during the summer and 2.98 to 1 during the non-summer period, although they are not advocating for these ratios in this proceeding. The settling parties contend that staff's argument regarding the CCOSS is misplaced, and that the company's prior analysis did not determine cost differentials based on time of use. The company acknowledges that its determination of the TOD rate is not accurate, as a a new study, but such a new study does not exist. The one will be conducted no later than 2026, and the proposed TOD rate should be adopted to address the serious lack of investment in public charging infrastructure, claiming there is a high risk of another 3 or more years of lagging charging station investment in the company's territory. With respect to load shifting, staff contends the settlement rate could induce EV fleet managers to shift their loads from the current LGS rate, a demand-based rate with larger on-peak to off-peak ratio. Staff argues fleets are not uniquely positioned to manage charging in a way that public DCFC charging stations are not, and notes that fleets with load factors less than 15% may find the settlement rate economic to switch to. The settling parties contend that an EV fleet manager will have a far higher load factor, as a 15% load factor represents charging of only 3.5 hours per day. They suggest rates other than the settled TOD would be a much better option for fleet owners. Further, they argue in the unlikely scenario of a fleet customer with a load factor less than 15%, the flexibility inherent in fleet charging may make the company's existing LGS STOU rate more appealing. In any case, the settling parties argue, if the commission is concerned about the possibility of fleet owners adopting the settled TOD rate, it could limit the rate to only public fast charging stations. I could pause here for your discussion, answer any questions, or provide a recommendation.
Yeah, if you could provide a recommendation, hopefully relatively briefly, that'd be great.
Sure. No problem. With respect to on-peak hours, we note that given the significant portfolio of resources the parties to the company's ERP proceeding are expecting to procure, it is difficult to say for certain how the supply-demand balance will play out hour to hour. That being said, staff suggested range of on-peak hours of 3 to 9 p.m. appears to be more accurate than the settlement period of 1 to 7 p.m. given 2022 actual data, and the likely impact of the ERP will only exacerbate that. Accordingly, we recommend that the commission adopt that aspect of staff's proposal. We also agree that staff that net peak load, system peak, net of projected renewable production, is the correct metric to evaluate. The company's focus on system peaks is inadequate given the broader need for emission-free power. Instead, the emphasis should be on matching loads to renewable energy production profiles as best as possible. Accordingly, we recommend guiding the company to develop its upcoming CCOSS to assess or be expanded to also assess net peak loads in a manner consistent with the outcome of the ERP process. Would you like me to stop there? Go on to price?
Yes. No, stop there. Commissioner Plant, thoughts on the recommendation? Where are you on this?
Yeah, so we're specifically talking about the peak period in this.
Yes.
Just okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the argument for the 3 to 9 or a 3 to 7, I guess, but 3 to 9 peak would make sense. I do think that, the point about the ERP still being out there, the resources aren't going to come on until, we're actually looking at the next evening rate. I think it is justifiable, but we also do have the IRA incentives in place, and I can imagine, hopefully that's driving some solar investment as well. And using the net makes a lot of sense to me too. So I would support.
Commissioner Goldman.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mendelson. I also agree with your recommendation. I mean, it looks obviously to be determined what exactly the ERP lands on and how that changes those net load hours. But it certainly seems to me net load hours are the proper metric to look at for the times we need to be covering. And it's not even current data, right? It's 2022 data. Certainly seems to indicate that the 3 to 9 p.m. is a much more accurate range to actually capture that net load peak demand better than what was shown in the settlement agreement.
I agree as well, and would just say I greatly appreciate Mr. Haglund's efforts to develop this record on a peak demand net of renewables of 3 to 9, and just think we need to start more tightly aligning rate incentives around actual system needs. So Mr. Mendelson, you want to go to the next one?
Sure. The next issue is the price ratio, or on-peak to off-peak price ratio. Here, advisors are a bit concerned that neither staff nor settling parties conducted a very thorough analysis. Staff suggested a price ratio of 3 to 1 summer and 2 to 1 non-summer, because that was what was incorporated in other TOU rates as a policy matter, to basically ignore cost considerations. Settling parties, on the other hand, suggested a price ratio of 1.2 to 1. Based on existing units, we note that neither unit is really a base load unit, and no consideration was made for facility load factor or T&D costs. In the end, it's difficult to determine whether this is a credible approach without meaningful pro and con argument on the record. We recommend the Commission accept the price ratio adopted in the settlement agreement based on a limited evaluation of alternative cost-based values, and with the notion that this matter will be thoroughly evaluated with an improved CCOSS and with full comprehension of the resource to be selected in the current and critically transitional ERP in the foreseeable future.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I agree with the recommendation, and I appreciate the the analysis done by staff, but I think that a lot of what they're arguing is kind of the length of sleeves on a vest. It's what we heard from both ChargePoint and from CEO is that I think CEO said 90% of public charging, they flatten the rate to the customer. And so we're talking about what's the right price signal when the signal actually isn't even delivered to the person making a decision. They're getting a flat rate anyway. So what we're really talking about is how much is going to end up being a cost that falls to the burden of the host. And what we're trying to do is get more hosts having charging infrastructure out there, and I think that their recommendation would actually accomplish the opposite. And I would note that this service territory is far below the state average in adoption of EVs, and as well as public charging infrastructure, which those are obviously tied together. And so I think in order to kind of move us in the right direction, the settling parties solution, I think, is the best one.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I'm struggling with this one because at the same time we're trying to kind of establish this going forward in a way that can be sustainable. We're trying to both jumpstart kind of the industry and introduction of more EVs, especially in Black Hills Electric territory, but do so, I think, in a way that properly communicates the economics, especially moving forward, so people can make a sustainable business decision here. Especially if we're looking at the summer peaks and an actual impact of hitting that much demand on peak, 1.2 to 1 seems like a very weak price signal. We sat and debated the time frame, but again, if it's only a 20% difference, it's not an incredibly strong price signal anyway that we're talking about. And I agree with you. We certainly heard evidence, Commissioner Plant, that essentially the charging providers are obscuring the price signal before it goes to the end customers anyway. So there's probably not a lot of training customer behavior that's actually happening, but at the end of the day, that's their choice in how they run their business and run their economics. So, I was considering if there was a way to kind of moderate this and look at the summer at like a 2 to 1 peak, but keep the winter at a 1.2 to 1 peak. I understand we'll reevaluate this soon. So curious to hear what the chair says. If we do settle on keeping it at the 1.2 to 1 peak, I'd certainly like to see in the decision language that we see this as a temporary situation in order to spur development, but would like to move to more price reflective rates as we move on into the future, just so that we're not failing to communicate that. Because there's two sides of this coin. Of course, I think we'd like to see increased access and development of EVs and charging infrastructure in Black Hills Electric service territory. But if we have rates that do not properly reflect the actual cost being incurred on the system, say on summer peaks, that's really to the detriment of other Black Hills Electric customers who are not utilizing this technology. So there's two sides of the coin, and I want to kind of be sensitive to each. So it would be my preference to go a bit higher in the summer, but I understand may be difficult in this specific situation. So if we don't, I'd like to see decision language that we'd like to move in the direction to make it more cost reflective, especially on the summer peak situation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sympathetic. I think on this record, it's tough to do a separate rate in the summer. So I'd probably just follow the recommendation, but I'm more than happy to include the language you suggest. And, trying to get this right for the future. I mean, for me, the big deal is just getting the 3 to 9 hours defined as the right hours, and how it gets implemented. I'm, a little more willing to work with it over time, but it's just, I think we're going to be curtailing solar from 1 to 3. So the 1 to 7 just drives me a little crazy. And I think our highest loss of load probability, like Texas and California, as Mr. Haglund suggested, is, going to creep out to 7 to 9. So getting that piece right now is really important to me. But I'm happy putting in the language you suggest and sort of working toward this in the future. So I don't know, Commissioner Plant, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think that's good language to include. I would, and Commissioner Gilman, just want to get your take on this. I mean, I think 80% of the charging, an EV owner charging, is done at home. We already know that if we're actually designing a system well, and all this stuff is going to be decided in other cases, obviously, within Black Hills territory, then those EVs should provide a benefit to the system with that kind of flexibility of home charging or integration into a VPP or things like that. So I don't want us to look at the public charging infrastructure alone in terms of the cost, but really look at the larger picture of how much benefit are the EVs providing to the system in conjunction with, the costs of providing the charging. So not looking at them within an isolation, I guess, is the only thing I'd be concerned.
Commissioner Gilman, any response?
No, I think that's fair. And I think as these things develop over the years, and ideally in the near future, we get a lot better data about how these are really being utilized. I mean, here we're starting to see some time of day of use, when the sessions start coming in. And as you point out, DC fast charge is kind of its own animal, as as an EV driver. So to the extent these are people just passing through, hit the fast charger right on the system peak, right on the hottest summer day, and move on, there was absolutely no benefit from that charge from that person charging. To the extent these help support people who actually live in Black Hills Electric service territory, adopting vehicles and charging, more rationally off peak at a slower rate a lot of the time, I see a benefit there. And I think, in our maybe description in the decision of really indicating ambition to move to more cost reflective rates that, indicate, and I'd be happy if that says that, evaluating the total system benefit and the cost reflective rates all in. I think we need to better understand some of that, like who are the customers, what is the usage profile of the DC fast chargers, to understand, are they kind of a net benefit to the actual Black Hills Electric customers or not in total. And to me, I just don't know, because the usage pattern is probably so different than like a level 2, which is probably more your local traffic, that it would be very helpful to have that sort of information in the future to really be able to evaluate who we're talking about and what benefits or costs they impose on the system in total.
Sense. Let's go to the load shifting issue, Mr. Mendelson.
Yes, with respect to the issue of load shifting, advisors recommend the commission require the EV rate agreed to be specifically available only to public charging stations, not corporate fleets.
Commissioner Plant,
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman.
I support the recommendation. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially if one of the main arguments here is the inelasticity of people's ability to charge. That is just not exactly relevant, not as relevant for fleets, and we don't want people cherry picking their rates, you know, and causing essentially a negative revenue situation for the entire system. So I think that's a very reasonable way to move forward.
And I guess Commissioner Plant, Commissioner Gilman, would you like to see this as a TBC order or ABC?
What's the time frame, Mr. Mendelson?
I mean, we could get this out as soon as possible, but it's been a little a bit delayed, but there's no specific requirement at this juncture.
I mean, I think it could be a fairly cut and dry TBC process, but I, you know, all things considered, if there's not a massive time crunch, I'd like to see the language that we discussed.
All right. I think one vote's enough for that, but any thoughts, Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I just want to make sure it's okay. I'm going to be out of contact for a little bit here in the upcoming week, and I don't want us to, if everything's waiting on my review, I don't want to hold that up. But if it's not on deadline, that's okay.
Yeah, so why don't we do this? Would you be okay, Commissioner Plant, if we did this as an ABC order that maybe advisors ran by Commissioner Gilman and us, or would you like to wait until you're back, or how would you like to proceed?
No, that would be fine with me. Yeah, I just don't want you waiting for me, and I'm, you know, I don't have any internet.
Sounds fun. All right, so I think this is a quasi ABC, quasi TBC order accepting the settlement agreement in part and modifying it in part, and we can take it from there. Mr. Mendelson.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep.
Let's skip over to Mr. Depew and take up the energy assistant system benefit charge, and then we'll come back to items 4 and 5 and Mr. Davis.
Sure. Good morning, commissioners. This is Deepesh Deepu from trial staff. This is in the matter of energy assistance system benefit charge for 2023-24 pursuant to utilities rules for CCR 723-3-3412 and for CCR 723-4-4412. The energy assistance energy system benefit charge, or as EASBC, is a fixed monthly charge collected by the investor-owned electric and gas utilities from all ratepayers, unless they opt out or are otherwise exempt. The EASBC was enacted as a result of Colorado House Bill 21-1105 and is codified in the statute at 40-8.7-104 in braces, Colorado Revised Statutes. EASBC provides financial funding for income qualified energy assistance programs. So the rules prescribe Rule 4412M of gas utilities rule and 3412M of electric utility rules provide that the EASBC charge will be adjusted to inflation annually in accordance with the charges in the U.S. Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index for Denver, Aurora, and Lakewood, beginning on October 1st, 2023. And the rules also direct the commission staff to compute these charges and adjust the charges for the next calendar year. So accordingly, we have the staff has considered the inflation, and it comes to about 4.7%. And the charge adjusted with this inflation rate will be 79 cents, which is 4 cents higher than the last calendar year. So the decision that the commission has to make are threefold. First, to approve opening a miscellaneous proceeding to set the 2023-24 EASBC charge. Second, to approve the new EASBC charge. And third, to direct the PUC director to issue a letter that will be filed in this miscellaneous proceeding.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, I can make a recommendation.
Oh, yeah, if you can make your recommendation, that'd be great.
Yeah, the staff recommends that all the three should be approved. We can open a new miscellaneous proceeding docket and circulate the letter issued by the PUC director.
Commissioner Plant.
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gumman.
Thanks, Mr. DeVue. I also agree with your recommendation.
As do I. And that can be an ABC order accomplishing those three things consistent with your recommendation. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Davis, take us home on the last two end dockets.
Thank you, commissioners. As you know, over the past few months and for the next several months, members of the commission staff have been presenting decisions to open proceedings to implement various components of the extensive legislation passed during the 2023 session. This month, we will present at least a couple of decisions whether to open new proceedings to implement certain provisions in Senate Bill 23-291. Today, I'm going to present the first that's related to tariffs, policies, and practices related to the beneficial electrification of transportation and buildings and the deployment of distributed energy resources. And later this month, we'll be presenting the opening of another proceeding to begin implementing the contemplated modifications to the gas utilities gas cost adjustment, or GCA. The opening of these new statute-related proceedings will be considered in the context of other new dockets that follow previous key proceedings, including my other presentation this morning related to the Commission's decision granting public services application addressing certain strategic issues for BE and demand-side management, namely the follow-on M docket for third-party implementation of certain pilot programs. So for this first new proceeding, I'd like to present the provisions in Senate Bill 23-291 that address customer connections to and disconnections from investor-owned electric and gas utility systems. Section 40-3.21046 requires the Commission to complete a study examining electric utility tariffs and interconnection policies and practices with an eye towards barriers to BE and distributed energy resources. In addition to barriers presented by tariffs, policies, and practices, the Commission must examine whether traditional cost causation and cost recovery principles, those kinds of things that we consider in rate cases, also pose barriers to BE and DERs, including whether customers are required to bear the full incremental cost of transformer, substation, or service upgrades needed at the time of interconnection. Senate Bill 23-291 further references the utilities distribution system planning process and requires the Commission to examine whether DSP can better plan for and accommodate future BE and DER deployment. The statutorily required study must be completed no later than March 15th of next year. Section 40-3.10452 states that the Commission may adopt rules to establish standards for customers voluntarily disconnecting from a gas utility system. And relatedly, Section 43-10451 prohibits gas utilities from penalizing or charging a fee to customers who voluntarily terminate service. Section 40-3.21043.2 also prohibits Colorado gas utilities from providing an incentive, including a line extension allowance, to establish gas service to a property. So on or before December 31st of this year, Each of the investor-owned gas utilities must file an updated tariff to reflect the removal of any incentives for an applicant to establish gas service to a property. So the principal decision point for you on this first of this 291 related cases to open in September is whether to open a proceeding, one, to consider the transformer, substation, service upgrades, and distribution system planning process to accommodate future electrification and distributed energy resources, including the associated cost allocation and timelines for new service. Two, to otherwise support the examination of the electric utility tariffs, policies, and practices to complete that statutorily mandated study. Three, to collect information on potential requirements for dual fuel utilities to provide customers with information about and options for electric, space, and water heating. Four, to examine the elimination of incentives for gas service to properties. And five, to prepare for the promulgation of rules to establish the standards for voluntary disconnection from gas utility systems. So the commission should discuss whether to adopt that scope for this hearing, whether to appoint a hearing commissioner to manage the case, whether to schedule in an order adopted today a public comment hearing, and whether to issue questions related to the study that needs to be completed. So with that introduction, I'll turn it over to the commissioners for their discussion.
Commissioner Plant, what do you think?
That all sounded good to me. The one additional question I had, which I didn't hear in there, maybe I missed it, was how we handle territories that include non-jurisdictional utilities. And I'm not sure exactly what our role is there. But that's
Mr. Davis.
Well, what I've presented from the statute primarily relates to investor-owned electric and gas utilities. The study is that's required and is the primary driver for today's agenda item is specifically targeted at investor-owned electric utilities, tariffs, policies, and practices. However, I think what I've proposed for discussion purposes is a scope of a docket that is broader than that study that's required and is looking more generally at barriers to BE and DER deployment, and also to look into what is happening with interconnections for electric service for properties that are considering all electric or considering gas and electric, but the electric service would be compatible with all electric in the future. So it's mostly focused on the utilities that the commission has rate jurisdiction over, but you raise a good point. Sometimes the gas utilities are serving service areas where customers get their electricity from a co-op that's not regulated by us.
Yeah, so I'm kind of wondering what our approach might be in those areas, or I'm just not sure where our jurisdiction begins and ends, and where that policy begins and ends if we're moving customers from a gas utility that we regulate to an electric utility that we don't regulate. How we work with that.
There's nothing that would. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, sounds like a question for the M docket, but perhaps you can give a better answer than that, Mr. Davis.
No, that's exactly where I was going. And there's no harm in asking, but where it gets difficult is compelling.
Commissioner Gutman.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Commissioner Plant. I think if you look through the list of questions that is proposed for kind of the kickoff here, which will especially be helpful to consultants helping us work on that study. Part of it will be to look at what is the best practice. I mean, there's kind of two potentials with the non-regulated utilities. Either they're doing this in some ways that could be better than what we're seeing in the jurisdictional utilities, or in a way that could be worse than what we're seeing in the jurisdictional utilities. So I think in terms of approach, step one is understand, to the extent that we can, what's going on at different places, especially if some of those places represent best practice. The study will be specific to the jurisdictional electric utilities per the statute. But then, I think it will be part of the discussion there, maybe if there are concerning policies, practices, or tariffs at other utilities that are non-jurisdictional, where does that go? I think that's a reasonable topic of conversation there. But I think this is a really reasonable grouping, although it's a mouthful. So thank you, Mr. Davis. A reasonable grouping of very similar issues. We have kind of this statutorily required study. At the same time, there are kind of other issues going on, other things we need to understand with what are the actual experiences on the ground of people trying to electrify, and how can we best understand those. And then clearly, although the study is specific to electric investor-owned utilities, the voluntary disconnect issues with gas utilities clearly relate back to this same situation of what does it look like? Where are the sticky parts of seeing customers electrify, right? Like, to me, is the gist of a lot of what we're looking at, and a lot of what stemmed from some of those 291 issues. So I think this is a reasonable way to move forward. I think the questions that'll be proposed or have been proposed are going to be very helpful to kick off this effort and give a good view into how this all goes. In some cases, asking for a decent amount of detail from the utilities in terms of what goes on during these different processes and what their internal processes are. To the extent the statute asks us to evaluate policies and practices, some of those may be written and many of those may not be written. So we've tried to essentially capture a way that we can understand what this actually looks like from a customer experiencing it, and where does this go in the company, and why and how long do these things take, are all going to be very helpful and insightful things for us to understand as part of the study. So, in terms of how we take this proceeding, I'd be happy to work on it as hearing commissioner. Clearly, need to understand each of your perspectives on that. There will be some work here working with managing our consultant on the actual study, as well as how we move all these different parts. And I would hope that in the relative near term, that includes a public comment hearing to hear from, different developers and builders kind of trying to work their way through this experience, which will inform, of course, the study, but also kind of the broader proceedings. So I think it would be ideal to get that calendared relatively soon, but probably depends how it goes if we do decide to go hearing commissioner or not.
Well, I just want to thank you for volunteering to exercise leadership, Commissioner Gilman. And I would propose let's go through the next M docket. And then let's come back and have a conversation about hearing commissioners in general in light of that one, maybe also with the GCA reform future one coming down the pike as part of that discussion. So again, appreciate the leadership and let's just have the hearing commissioner conversation in a more comprehensive context. So unless Commissioner Plant, anything else on this one, or should you ready to jump to the next one? Go ahead, let's jump to the next one. Mr. Davis.
Sure. The second new proceeding that I'd like to present was discussed in proceeding number 22A0309EG. And that was, again, the strategic issues application for BE and DSM that was filed by Public Service. In decision number C-23-413, the Commission found that given the legislative guidance and lackluster performance in certain BE and DSM efforts by Public Service, it was necessary for the Commission to open a miscellaneous docket to further explore those issues and garner stakeholder input on reasonable parameters for company-issued requests for proposals, or RFPs, for the third-party provision of gas demand response services, virtual power plants, and other innovations that may be available from the private sector, such as neighborhood electrification. From that stated intention in the Commission's decision, the main objectives for this new M-docket could be to identify the core objectives and timelines for those 3 pilots, to set the main technical cost and time parameters for the RFPs, to establish milestones for the RFPs, and then to set operational and reporting milestones for the pilots themselves. The timeline for this sort of proceeding should be accelerated if the pilots are intended to inform the next strategic issues application proceeding, and that's expected to be filed in 2025. So for this new M-docket, the decision points for you are to set the scope, whether to pose questions to assist the Commission in meeting the objectives, whether to adopt a procedural schedule today, or whether to adopt a hearing commissioner to manage the case and to leave some or all of those tasks to the hearing commissioner. So again, I'll turn it over to you all for your discussion.
Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I'm real excited about this M-docket. And there were a number of questions that I know that we've identified and staff has identified for the various components of this. And one of them referred to compensation schemes for VPPs in vertically integrated electric markets. And I just wanted to make sure that, and I don't know if this was meant to be included in that, but really the compensation schemes for customers, I'm really interested in as it relates in the VPP component, how we structure compensation for customers participating in a VPP would be an additional question that I would like to include in there as well.
I totally support the addition of that question. Commissioner Goman.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if an RFP for a pilot, so like the intent is to work with stakeholders and come out with some guardrails essentially for an RFP that the company would then issue, ideally early next year, I think. In that case, likely that RFP will establish the situation between a third-party provider and the company. And I think there's a question on here about like kind of what transparency should be necessary to understand what the situation is between that third party and the customer. But I'm not sure, perhaps we phrase it like a little looser. I'm just not sure that an RFP would establish what the situation or compensation scheme between the third party and the customer needs to be or could be. I think that's probably, I think that information should be solicited in the RFP, but I don't know if the RFP would possibly set like criteria or guardrails around what that situation looks like.
Yeah, no, yeah, thank you. I was thinking with respect to the M-docket. I mean, I know that I think the M-docket is designed to sort of gather information that would then inform an RFP. But one of the things that I'd like the participants in the M-docket to do is to address that issue of how successful compensation for participating customers can be structured. For the discussion, I think that different I don't know if the RFP would include that or if it would not, but that would be a part of the discussion in the M-docket for sure.
Okay, so we'd solicit the information, but, and then determine in the docket if that's actually criteria that should be established within the RFP.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's reasonable.
Commissioner Gilman, opening the docket.
Yeah, so it's proposed a fairly accelerated timeline, as Mr. Davis pointed out. Very ideally, you would have enough time to actually make the solicitation, go through that approval, and then have time to see at the very least one winter of your gas demand response and electrification operating, and at least one summer of the VPP operating. Ideally, you get more than that, but I think it's important to have some results by the next strategic issues, which will be filed sometime in 2025. And I would say here, ideally in the latter half of 2025, so we can actually use that summer to see some of this play out. So it's a fairly accelerated time frame. So I certainly do see this as a situation that works better with the hearing commissioner. I think it's proposed to be kind of round of comments workshop, and wrap it up still within this year. So I'd be happy to do that work if you all would like me to. And if you don't want me to, then everybody can do it. Somebody else can do it. I know, you figured out from there.
Well, three choices: en banc, hearing commissioner, ALJ. I guess just to frame up, I'm fine opening the docket. I think the last time we talked about this in the context of the tri-state M docket on regional market participation, and I know you had some concerns then, Commissioner Gilman, about the role of hearing commissioner, and we ended up doing that one en banc. But given the amount of work in front of us, I think it's probably time to really take a hard look at this. And it's not really on the agenda today, but that GCA reform docket is something I'm personally interested in and have been spending a lot of time thinking about. So I don't know, Commissioner Plant, we have 3 M dockets in front of it. If you include the GCA reform, I think Commissioner Gilman is volunteering to lead 2 of them. I may be interested in leading one of them. I don't know what your thoughts are, what you want to be involved in, how you see this playing out. It sounds like you have a lot of personal interest in this, the one in front of us right now. So where are you on this? How would you like to see this go forward?
Yeah, I do have a lot of interest in it, and I would be willing to do the if we wanted to split up the 3 between the 3 of us, I'd be willing to do this one as so that Commissioner Gilman didn't have to do 2 different ones. I've never been a hearing commissioner yet, so I'm not even sure what I'm volunteering for. Yeah.
Commissioner Gilman, what do you think of that allocation? I think your heart may be closer to the VPP one, so I don't know if this works for you, or where would you like to go?
Yeah, I mean, I've been spending time on both of them already, so I can certainly allow the RFP one to go to Commissioner Plant if he's interested. I think you need to look pretty hard at a proposed procedural schedule, as I had some hand in laying that out. So I was available and willing to do those different activities. So you'd probably have to look at that pretty closely. And we tried to give some thought to how that procedural schedule then flows into a larger schedule that gets us to, seeing trials run by 2025, and talk through some of the contingencies with this approach. But I certainly think you can work through that if you're interested in taking it on. So either way, if you would really like to do it, then go ahead and do it. You don't have to take it to spare me, because I already was working on it and can just continue to do so. If you don't feel
Not
like
sparing
doing it.
yourself.
But the answer to what's it like is it's a lot more nimble and quicker if you have a vision of what needs to play out procedurally.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that the subject matter interested me a lot, and I'd be interested in that part. And I do not currently have an understanding of the procedural requirements, so that's something that I would need to learn.
Commissioner Govan, you want to revisit this in a couple of weeks, or you want to decide
I mean,
now?
I think there are things that have to happen now. Like I think those questions need to get issued today or tomorrow, because we've set out at least the deadline we've envisioned would have responses to those coming in several weeks, and it would be good to not maybe blow the anticipated timeline from the start. But so no, I'd rather move on with it. The one thing I'll point out, Commissioner Plant, if you do take the RFP proceeding, is we discussed the neighborhood electrification as part of that effort as well. I will just mention without any detail that something is proposed within the Clean Heat Plan that indicates that. So we did try to craft that first question to really identify what might be the difference between what is proposed there and what's proposed here. You know, I think what was envisioned for these DSM RFPs was third party and really understanding the abilities and what a third party can bring to these. And so I think, you know, we had a question related to kind of trying to sort out, is there still value in understanding what a third party could do here versus perhaps the company run program. So I just wanted to maybe point out that nuance, because that was something I think put some thought to and try to ensure that we understand and acknowledge that there is something similar addressed elsewhere at the current time.
So I guess, I'll turn it back to you in a second, Commissioner Plant, but are we sort of going to get out an ABC order with the questions and a referral to Commissioner Plant as hearing commissioner? I think that may be the best thing given your schedule, Commissioner Plant, but feel free to respond to that or anything else you want.
Well, I think he wanted to add that one question, so we can do it either way. Like, if he wants to get his question in, maybe he can become hearing commissioner right now and issue that on his own.
Yeah, all right. Well, are you going to have a chance to get that out in the next hour or two, Commissioner Plant?
Yeah. So you mean the question? Get the question
The
out?
whole thing.
Yeah. And the other thing that I would add in is something addressing scalability, as you know, as we're looking at these pilots, you know, really how they can be scaled across the entire territory. We don't want to just have a, you know,
you're hearing commissioner. You don't have to. You don't have to ask us. Or
I don't have to talk to you about anything. Okay.
You don't have to ask us anything, but it's my pretty hard recommendation that they go out very soon.
Yeah. And I'll connect up after we're done with this meeting to get that out.
All right. I think we're looking at two ABC decisions that are fairly simple, opening the dockets and setting a hearing commissioner, and then it's up to the hearing commissioner to get further orders out. Is that sort of where we are, Mr. Davis, Commissioner Gilman?
I think that's fine. I'd also like to add that I only mentioned 3 cases today, but I do have more coming your way. So I know we have other statutorily required proceedings that are scheduled to open in October and November. So I can provide more information on that if that's helpful right now. But otherwise, I think your path forward will work with decisions opening proceedings and establishing hearing commissioners, and then all further orders will come from the hearing commissioner.
From where I'm sitting, Mr. Davis, that might be unhelpful.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if Commissioner Plant wants like his pick of the litter. This is not all we have to offer today's option. So
I'm not sure I'm prepared to examine the rest of the litter. But Commissioner Plant, I turn it back to you, sir.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's okay.
I guess well, once we see the litter, I guess we can reevaluate, and we're obviously going to need a bunch of help from our really capable ALJs, so especially given how much is a matter of first impression. So I think that's as much as we can do today. Anything else, Commissioner Gilman?
to just recap, DSMSI RFP, it's the most letters ever, but that's what I had been calling this, is going to Commissioner Plant, and the MZAC on BE barriers, voluntary gas disconnections, that whole lot will go to me as hearing commissioner, just to clarify.
Yeah, and I'm expressing a personal interest in the GCA reform one.
Okay. Sounds good. Just wanted to clarify for sure.
I think that's where we're at. I think that can be a series of ABC orders. Mr. Davis, does that give you everything you need?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Commissioner Plant, anything else?
Nope.
Commissioner Gilman, anything else?
Nothing additional.
With that, we're adjourned. Thanks to both of you.
Thanks.